Artifact Porn, Part 32. In 2022, a badger burrowing into a cave in Spain accidentally dug up the largest collection of Roman coins ever found in the region. A local man was walking outside the cave and noticed nearly 100 coins randomly scattered on the ground next to a burrow. So he alerted archaeologists, who eventually found over 100 more ancient coins inside. Most of them date back to 300 AD and were likely hidden there by refugees over 1700 years ago. This apartment in Istanbul has renovations from 3 empires and 1 republic that ruled over the city at different times, all being built on top of each other. In 2016, Spanish man Juan Francisco was making some renovations in his home that resulted in a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. Behind the first wall he removed, he found the facade of a Renaissance-era hospital that was built in the 16th century. Juan immediately alerted archaeologists, who told him it once belonged to St. George's Hospital, a long-forgotten masterpiece by famed Spanish architect Andrés de Vandel-Vera. The structure is more than 30 feet tall and covers several floors of Juan's home. It's unclear as to why such an incredible work was hidden behind the wall of someone's home, but it had likely been that way for centuries. The most morbid facts of all time, Part 2. The Grinch as a kid was played by an 18-year-old actor with dwarfism. Sadly, he died of heart failure just 2 years after the movie released. When a photojournalist took this picture of a little girl in Syria, she raised her arms in surrender because she thought the camera was a gun. In 2009, Moscow native Julia Popova was stabbed in the neck by a mugger, but she was in so much shock that she walked all the way home without even realizing that the knife was embedded in her neck, just millimeters from her spinal cord. She spent more than an hour with the blade inside of her before finally going to the hospital. In 1987, Kenneth Parks drove 12 miles to his mother-in-law's house and stabbed her to death in the middle of the night. But he didn't receive any jail time because Kenneth's lawyer was able to prove that he was sleepwalking the entire time. In 2012, a woman from New York donated her kidney to save the life of her boss. Her boss later fired her when she took too long to recover from the operation. Mohammed Bajay was an Iranian serial killer who raped and killed at least 40 young boys throughout the early 2000s. But his crimes only gained national attention because of the way in which he was executed. He was stoned by a mob, lashed 100 times, stabbed by the brother of one of his victims, and then hanged. Ever since she was a little girl, Jewel Shuping always wanted to be blind. So in 2006, she poured drain cleaner into her eyes and fully blinded herself. She says she's now happier than ever after fulfilling her lifelong wish. A Massachusetts man named Kenny Waters was wrongfully imprisoned for 18 years for murder. He was finally freed in 2001 after his high school dropout sister went to law school to prove his innocence. Sadly, he died 6 months after his release in a freak accident. After a mass shooting, you would expect complete silence at the crime scene. But police say one of the eeriest things is all the phones that ring when family members are trying to find out if their loved ones are okay. Morbid Facts, Part 514. In the year 2000, 11-year-old Candace Newmaker died during an extreme therapy session in Colorado. The adopted girl was undergoing attachment therapy when 4 unlicensed therapists decided to perform the controversial treatment known as rebirthing. She was wrapped in a flannel sheet and covered with pillows to represent a womb and was told to fight her way out of it, with the apparent expectation that this would help her attach to her adoptive mother. All 4 therapists used their body weight to push down on Candace and resist her attempts to free herself. Candace screamed several times that she couldn't breathe and was gonna die, and even started to vomit, but was simply called a quitter by one of the therapists. 40 minutes into the session, Candace was asked if she was ready to be reborn, to which she faintly responded no, which would be her last word before she died of asphyxiation. All 4 fake therapists were prosecuted, 2 of whom were sentenced to 16 years in prison after the disturbing footage was shown in court. Morbid Facts, Part 518. When Jimi Hendrix was 16, his mother died from a ruptured spleen at the young age of 33. But Jimi's father didn't allow him or his brother to attend the funeral. Instead, he gave them shots of whiskey and told them that this was how men should deal with a loss. After several hours of drinking on board a ferry, Englishwoman Emma Blackwell fell to her death. She'd apparently been imitating Kate Winslet's pose from the Titanic movie and lost her footing before plummeting from the ship. Smile mask syndrome is a psychological condition characterized by prolonged unnatural smiling. It can lead to painful strain of the facial muscles and result in an inability to stop smiling even when agitated or upset. In 1993, Missouri man James Scott damaged a levee on the Mississippi River simply to delay his wife from coming home so that he could party. Instead, the river ended up flooding over 14,000 acres, and the 23-year-old man was sentenced to life in prison for intentionally causing a catastrophe. Morbid Facts, Part 512. This 15th century Italian painting is the earliest known depiction of the guinea worm, an awful parasite that has haunted humans for thousands of years. It enters the system through dirty water containing its larva, and grows into a 3-foot-long worm that eventually erupts from the skin, causing an incredibly painful burning sensation. To relieve this, people often splash water onto the affected area, prompting the worm to discharge more larvae into the person's body and start the horrible cycle all over again. There were more than 3.5 million guinea worm cases in 1986, but that number has been significantly reduced in recent years. Armed only with a knife, Master Sergeant Roy Benavides went to assist a 12-man Special Forces team who were surrounded by 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers during the Vietnam War. Following the grueling 6-hour battle, Benavides had 37 puncture wounds, exposed intestines, and a broken jaw. He was pronounced dead until he managed to spit blood in the face of the man who was zipping up his body bag. Benavides eventually made a full recovery and was awarded the Medal of Honor for his heroic actions. Morbid Facts, Part 507. Martha Stewart once dated Anthony Hopkins but broke it off with him after watching The Silence of the Lambs. She says she couldn't separate Hopkins from his cannibalistic character Hannibal Lecter. RFK's assassin Sirhan is still alive today and has been denied parole 17 times. According to historians, we would have a lot more Egyptian mummies intact today if so many of them weren't eaten during the Victorian era. People used to believe that the ground-up corpses of ancient Egyptians could cure different ailments. Harvey Weinstein reportedly had gangrene around his private area, giving his shaft a Frankenstein look that appeared as if it was chopped off and sewn back on. His ghoulies were also removed during treatment of his gangrene, leading to several of his victims suspecting that he was intersex. When Roman Emperor Commodus was in power, he had his men gather all the dwarves and disabled people they could find around the city. They were brought to the Colosseum, where each of them was given a meat cleaver and forced to fight to the death. Morbid Facts, Part 510. Ariana Grande reportedly has a longtime stalker named Paige Neiman who tries to impersonate the famous singer. She's been obsessed with Grande since she was 12 years old and has allegedly undergone several plastic surgeries to look like her despite being only 20 years old. When the Titanic sank, the richest passenger on board was business mogul John Jacob Astor IV, who had enough money in his bank account to build 30 Titanics. He ended up giving up his spot in the final lifeboat to instead save the lives of a random woman and her daughter. These were the last photos of Garrett Miller, taken just minutes before a soccer goalpost tipped over and struck him in the head, killing him instantly. In 2013, a family dog named Killian was protecting a baby boy from an abusive babysitter by standing between them and growling at her. This made the boy's parents suspicious of the babysitter, so they hid a recording device under the couch and heard her swearing at the baby while possibly shaking and slapping him. The sitter eventually pleaded guilty to assault and battery of a child and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Morbid Facts, Part 490. While filming for Gladiator, Oliver Reed died suddenly after challenging a group of sailors to a drinking contest at a bar. The actor consumed 8 pints of beer, 12 shots of rum, several shots of cognac, and an entire bottle of whiskey. He fell ill during the match and collapsed, dying of a heart attack in the ambulance en route to the hospital. It ended up costing the production company $3 million to recreate Reed's face with CGI, so he could appear in all the scenes that still needed to be filmed. Here's a photo taken by Challenger Deep of a beer bottle resting on the ocean floor 35,000 feet down, the deepest known point on the Earth's surface. This is the last known photo taken of Janet Johnson, a famous American mountaineer known for completing many difficult climbs throughout the world. She disappeared along with her friend John Cooper during a climb in 1973, until their bodies were found separately 2 years later, both wearing just one shoe and missing their ice picks. Cooper was found with a bloody wound on his stomach and a look of horror frozen on his face. Accordingly, several people, including examiners of the autopsy, believe that both Cooper and Johnson were murdered. The photo above was only discovered in 2020 when climbers found Janet's backpack and camera within the melting glacier. Artifact Porn, Part 33. Built during the reign of King Louis XVI in 1774, the Writing Boy was the first automatic android ever created. It was hand-built by Swiss watchmaker Pierre-Jacques Dreux, and was designed to mimic the act of someone writing with incredible precision. A milestone in the history of robotics and engineering, the android is comprised of 6,000 moving parts that took more than 20 months to put together. The Sidarium of St. Veronica is an engraving made by French artist Claude Milan in 1649. It was created from a single spiraling, unbroken line that starts at the tip of Jesus' nose. Discovered in 1972, this 8-inch long deuce was dropped by a Viking around the 8th century. Weighing in at just under 5 corics, it's the largest fossilized human turd ever found, and has provided valuable insights into the dietary practices of ancient Vikings. In 2013, an ancient tree at an archaeological site in Romania was uprooted during a thunderstorm. Beneath the tree, the site's caretaker discovered an ancient bronze matrix that was used as a mold to craft jewelry for the Dacian civilization over 2,000 years ago. Just last year, Irish farmer Michael Boyle found this 50-pound chunk of bog butter on his property after digging up something that reeked of cheese. Ancient farmers would often bury these large chunks of animal fat in bogs for preservation. Despite it dating all the way back to the Bronze Age, Boyle says it still tastes like butter. Morbid Facts, Part 492. In August of 2008, popular DJ deadmau5 and his tour manager missed their connecting flight in Barcelona by just a few minutes. While waiting in the terminal, pissed off that they would miss their next show, they watched as their flight took off and immediately crashed due to mechanical failure, killing 154 of the 172 passengers on board. deadmau5 said after witnessing the tragedy, quote, "There were maybe 800 to 1,000 people in the airport, and nobody made an effing sound. It was the creepiest shit." In Singapore, every person over 21 years old is automatically registered as an organ donor. Those who opt out are placed at the bottom of the priority list if they ever need an organ transplant. In 2010, 72-year-old Linda Chase left her roommate's dead body in the recliner chair that he died in for 18 months. She talked to his decaying corpse and watched NASCAR with him every day. After police performed a welfare check and found the man's body, Linda's only explanation was that she didn't want to be alone and he was the only person who was ever nice to her. She only got in trouble for cashing some of his benefit checks and was sentenced to 3 years probation and mental health treatment. Morbid Facts, Part 503. In 2013, well-respected meteorologist Tim Samaras became the first storm chaser killed by a tornado along with his son Paul and friend Carl. The Oklahoma tornado expanded from 1 mile to 2.6 miles in about 30 seconds and was the largest ever recorded. It suddenly took a sharp turn towards the group, leaving them screaming their last words over the radio, "We're gonna die." These were the final photos of extreme cave diver Dave Shaw just moments before his final dive into South Africa's Bushman's Hole. He blacked out at 872 feet while retrieving a fellow diver's body, and his helmet cam recorded his demise. Osama bin Laden's son Omar was severely beaten by his father for smiling too widely when he was a young boy. He trained in Al-Qaeda camps starting at 14 years old, but left the terrorist organization in 2000 since he didn't support the idea of killing innocent civilians. In 2006, Gail Laverne Grimes died in the hospital after surgeons spent 6 exhausting hours trying to separate her skin from a couch. The 500-pound woman had been sitting on her living room sofa for 6 years to the point where her skin had completely fused to the fabric. Rescue workers had to transport Gail in her couch using a trailer, and she ended up dying while still attached to it. Dirty Facts About History That They'll Never Teach You in School, Part 17. Adam West and Frank Gorshin were both kicked out of an orgy once because they refused to stop acting like Batman and the Riddler during it. The man who invented autopilot for airplanes did so in 1916, with the intent of founding the Mile High Club with another man's wife. It was working quite well until someone accidentally bumped into the off switch during the act, causing the aircraft to crash into the Long Island Sound. Both the pilot and passenger were unharmed, but their affair was discovered when they failed to explain why they were both naked when help arrived. According to historians, when Gandhi was in his 70s, he went to the extreme to test his sexual celibacy as part of his religion. He would conduct experiments where he would sleep naked with underage girls and refrain from touching them. Gandhi claimed that these tests were his moral duty. Winston Churchill was a bit of a nudist. He claimed to have some form of skin condition that made clothes uncomfortable for him to wear for long periods of time. When he visited the White House, he once had a conversation with FDR while he was completely naked. Morbid Facts, Part 485. In 1994, 13-year-old Texas boy Nicholas Barkley went missing after playing basketball with some friends. 3 years later, he was found in Spain and reunited with his family, but something was very off. The boy who came back had darker hair, brown eyes instead of blue, and a French accent, while looking much older than Nicholas would have been at the time. But perhaps blinded by grief, the Barkley family accepted this boy without question despite these major differences. To be fair, he claimed his kidnappers had taken him to France, dyed his hair, and changed his eye color to hide his identity. But a private investigator would soon reveal the boy's true identity as Frederick Borden, a 23-year-old Frenchman with a history of impersonating missing kids. Borden had apparently been searching for love and affection that he never received as a child. Known as the Chameleon, he's assumed over 500 false identities throughout his life, including those of orphans. Meanwhile, the true fate of Nicholas Barkley remains unknown to this day. Morbid Facts, Part 496. Last summer, 36-year-old Italian surfer Giuliana Manfrini died in a total freak accident while surfing off the coast of Indonesia. When she was catching a wave, a swordfish suddenly leaped out of the water and stabbed her directly in the chest with its bill. Despite immediate first aid from her surfing buddies and being rushed to a local hospital, she couldn't be saved. Here's the grave of a woman who chose to leave her name off and instead gave it the inscription, "I was somebody." She apparently told the cemetery sexton that eventually nobody would remember her anyway, so this inscription would at least be more memorable than she was. While on an African safari in 1963, Ernest Hemingway survived 2 plane crashes in a row. The first plane collided with a telephone wire and wound up in the Nile, leaving him with minor injuries. While Hemingway was being rescued from this first crash, the rescue plane also crashed. The plane caught on fire, so Ernest had to smash the door open with his head, causing extensive burns and a fractured skull. The novelist was presumed dead until he walked out of the jungle in high spirits, carrying bananas and a bottle of gin. Morbid Facts, Part 516. The Babushka Lady was the name given to an unidentified person who was present at JFK's assassination in 1963. He or she was seen filming before and after the president was shot in the head, but later disappeared into the crowd. That recording may have been crucial in revealing the truth about JFK's killing, but the person has never come forward with the footage. Austrian Mayor Hans Steininger died in 1567 after breaking his neck by tripping on his own ridiculously long beard while running from a house fire. In 2010, a Russian man died after being voluntarily buried alive by his friends. He was simply trying to overcome his irrational fear of dying when the ground suddenly caved in and crushed him. In 2008, a British woman died in one of the most embarrassing ways possible. Her husband admitted he would hook homemade clamps to the woman's nipples and administer electric shocks to turn her on. Apparently, it went a little too far this one time, and the woman was electrocuted to death. The husband was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to at least 20 years in prison. Morbid Facts, Part 504. According to his memoir, when Vice President J.D. Vance was 12 years old, his drug-addicted mother was once driving erratically and threatened to crash her car to kill them both. J.D. had no choice but to jump out of the speeding vehicle and run to a nearby house for help. He now refers to this event as a turning point in his life, since it prompted him to move in with his non-abusive grandmother and work towards a more stable life. In the year 2000, Mexican woman Ines Ramirez performed an hour-long C-section on herself after suffering 12 hours of constant pain. Using a large kitchen knife, she made a 7-inch vertical incision and pulled the baby boy out of her own uterus. Despite no prior medical training, both Ramirez and her baby miraculously survived. In 1996, 16-year-old Travis Lewis pleaded guilty to the murder of Sally McKay. While seeking closure, Sally's daughter Martha visited Travis several times in prison and eventually forgave him for killing her mother. When he was released on parole 23 years later, Martha allowed Travis to move in with her and gave him a job as groundskeeper of her estate. But when she realized the man was frequently stealing from her, Martha fired Travis and kicked him out. Soon afterwards, Travis broke into Martha's home and stabbed her to death before drowning in a nearby lake while running from police. Morbid Facts, Part 487. A 22-year-old woman from Ireland was recently left with severe internal injuries after her butt plug was pulled through her body during an MRI scan. She apparently believed she was safe to insert it before the procedure, believing the plug was made entirely of silicone. But it actually contained a metal core, causing it to react to the scanner's powerful magnets. She's expected to recover in the hospital, but this is why doctors always say you should never wear a butt plug while getting an MRI. In another ridiculous MRI case in 2023, a Brazilian lawyer tragically died after a scanner caused his gun to fire inside of the machine. After being repeatedly asked by doctors to remove all metal objects, Leandro Novaes decided not to reveal that he had a gun in his waistband, which ended up firing into his stomach. He spent several weeks in the hospital before succumbing to his costly bad decision. This case was a big reason why doctors always remind their patients to remove any firearms before receiving an MRI. Morbid Facts, Part 519. In 1995, 13-year-old Thad Phillips was kidnapped while he was asleep in his Wisconsin bedroom. He'd been abducted by 17-year-old Joseph Clark, a local boy who was obsessed with the sound of bones breaking. Over 48 grueling hours, Clark broke both of the boy's hips, legs, shins, and ankles with his bare hands. Phillips eventually managed to escape from the nightmare and reported Clark to police. Sometime later, Phillips was sitting at home awaiting the trial when one of Clark's friends rang the doorbell and shot Phillips twice in the back, apparently to prevent him from testifying. Clark was sentenced to life in prison, and Phillips was eventually able to walk again. In 2008, Indigenous Canadian man Brian Sinclair went to the hospital because of a blocked catheter. After many hours passed in the waiting area, other patients began to urge medical staff to attend to Sinclair, who was clearly in pain, but they responded that they were helping other patients and would eventually get to him. After 34 hours had passed, Sinclair ended up dying in the waiting room and had already developed rigor mortis by the time medical staff attended to him. Turns out he had a very treatable bladder infection and could have easily been saved. Morbid Facts, Part 483. In 1978, Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious and his girlfriend Nancy Spungen hosted a party in their New York City hotel room, the morning after which Nancy was found dead in the bathroom with a single stab wound to her abdomen. Despite being comatose on drugs the entire night and having zero recollection, Vicious admitted to the stabbing and was charged with her murder. Many believe that Nancy was actually killed by a drug dealer who was attempting to rob the drugged-up couple, and that Vicious was totally incapable of harming her considering the state he was in. But the bass player ended up dying of a drug overdose while out on bail before he could stand trial, and the case was closed. In 1996, Maryland woman Sharon Lopatko was killed in a bizarre case of consensual homicide. She had emailed dozens of men asking them to torture and kill her for mutual sexual gratification before meeting a man named Robert Glass who would follow through with her request. One morning, Sharon left her husband a note saying she would never return and told him not to track down her killer. Glass ended up strangling her to death and was soon arrested after police found the emails and discovered Sharon's body on his property. He admitted to fulfilling her torture fantasy, but also maintained that her death was an accident. Glass pled guilty and was sentenced to 3 to 5 years before dying of a heart attack while in prison.